Hello everyone, and thank you for joining today's webinar, How to Become a Safety Culture Change Agent. My name is Cassie Bolter and I'm the Events and Partnership Manager at Centus. Today's presenter is Ben Carnell, Centus's Head of Client Solutions. Ben leads the business function responsible for overseeing Centus's client partnerships. As an experienced psychologist, he brings a strong background in performance psychology across both high-performing sport and organisational contexts. He offers expertise in cultural diagnostics, strategy development, program facilitation, and leadership coaching to drive individual, team, and organisational improvement. Just before we get underway, please note we're unable to hear you during the presentation, so if you have any questions, please enter them into the question box and Ben will address them at the end of the webinar. Thanks for joining us. I'll now hand over to Ben.
Wonderful. Thank you very much, Cassie, and thank you to everyone on the call. Great to have you as part of today's webinar. As Cassie did introduce, my name is Ben Carnell, Head of Client Solutions with Centus. I've been with Centus now about 6 years and very passionate about what we do and what we do with our clients as part of that as well. For those unfamiliar with Centus, we are a management consulting company that specialises in culture and leadership change, particularly with high-risk clients, and looking at what does that look like from a safety point of view, well-being, and all the different elements that sit around that as well. This is our mission as an organisation, and part of what we do is shifting the language or the story that sits around safety, from safety not being there necessarily just to protect you from something, but actually it's there to protect you for something, and that certainly drives a lot of what we do and our engagements with different clients as part of that as well. In terms of today's handout, you'll be able to download that and access that. That handout has been put together as a way to capture some of the starts or the stops and the continues that pop up from today's webinar, and invite you to capture different notes there. What you'll also see on the flip side of that is also what we call the roadmap for change, which articulates some of those key steps that we will unpack today, but are critical in terms of driving what any change process is going to look like, in this case with respect to safety culture. Today's topic is a topic that I am very passionate about. It's a critical topic when we're talking about change, whether that be a big change, whether that be a small change, and often safety culture, can be quite a big change. So understanding what are some of those key steps, those critical elements that we need to consider along the way to help set that up for success over the long term as well. I know it's a topic that's important to a lot of people. I've had a lot of different conversations with people, particularly of recent as well, which I think is reflective of people starting to look post-COVID. Okay, what does it look like to start to shift our organisation in a different direction as well? One organisation on a slightly different note, but very related, and I think an excellent example of what big cultural or organisational change can look like, is the story of Orsted. And for those that know this story, incredible story to where we go back to around early 2000s, 2004 or thereabouts. This Danish energy company, massive company, 90% of their organisation and the work they do was driven through fossil fuels. They actually set the target and wanted to get to by 2025 to be completely renewable. Huge transformation for a company of this size and the nature of the work that they do. So they went about undertaking this change process and looking at what it would look like to move away from largely fossil fuels to be largely a renewable-based energy company. They started along this journey and it was going okay, but around 2006, 2008, it was, and for a whole host of reasons, some of those obvious, it was becoming clear that that was going to be difficult to do. And around about this time, as they sort of moved 2008 and beyondwards, their profits were actually dropping by around about 40%. And so all of a sudden, the organisation had to consider, well, this change that we're trying to initiate, is this worth it? How do we go about this change? Is it becoming too hard? Do we need to take a step back? To their credit, they actually, almost in for a penny, in for a pound, they thought, no, we're going to commit to this change and we are going to go on this journey of creating this change as well. So throughout this period, they went through this change process, and some of it we'll unpack today. but how they went about clearly articulating, this is the sort of organisation that we want to be. We want to move to a renewable organisation. We want to be a market leader in this particular organisation. And as these particular challenges came up along the way, how they went about uncovering those and looking at how they could navigate around those challenges was quite incredible. Where they are now is they're now about 30%, or recently we're about 30% of the market share. And as I mentioned, I think earlier, by 2019, 90% of their work was renewables, which is an incredible turnaround. What's interesting, as I mentioned, is the journey they went on, is they actually changed their name. So Ørsted actually representing historical Danish figures that actually were responsible for understanding some of the physics and the science that underpins renewable energy, and went about creating this story of getting everyone involved in, okay, what's going to be the new picture, the new image, the new branding of what Ørsted is going to look like. What's interesting about this journey that they went on is looking at the different stages that they went through. So the first stage they undertook is really looking at, well, what's the data telling us? Where is the world going to head in terms of energy production? What is that going to look like? What does that look like for us? They then started to form a steering committee, and the steering committee was in many senses looking at, what does it look like to start to get people on board? And there was clear communication out in the local newspaper, or, and starting to socialize with different groups, different forums, conferences and the like. This is the sort of organization that we want Ørsted to be. They then created a clear plan and a clear strategy, and the incredible value of creating this strategy is that once things got really difficult, and it can be easy to go, maybe we're out of our depth here, we need to sort of just back a step here, they were able to actually pursue through those challenges through 2008 into 10 into 12, that period there, because they had a clear strategy and they had a clear plan around how they're going to work through those particular obstacles as well. One of the key things they did, and we'll unpack this in particular today, is that they allowed people the time to get on board with the change. 2004 through to 2019, and their goals would be completely renewable by 2025. That's a very, very, well, you could argue it's all relative, but quite a long change process. They allowed the time, particularly up front, for people to get on board with that change. They involved people in that change, as I mentioned before, renaming the organization. They got thousands of people involved in coming up with ideas for what that could look like. There was this sense of ownership around, this is the sort of company that we want to create. It was these critical things that helped them to weather the storms that came up through that change process, to which since they've now been rated as by HBR as being the 7th most successful transformation process over recent times as well, which is quite an incredible change to consider as well. We're going to unpack this a little bit and what this might mean for us. And I know this, some of the challenges and how you overcome some of those stucks, as I mentioned, is a hot topic for a lot of people that are on this call as well. By means of an agenda, we're going to jump into a little bit of the science, a little bit of the brain and how that works and how that process has changed. Then we're going to jump into, well, what does that change process start to look like? How do you initiate that? What does that look like from a key stakeholder point of view? That's all well and good, but along the way, there's going to be objections, there's going to be challenges. So we're then going to jump into, well, how do we unpack those? How do we navigate those? How do we preempt those? And how do we start to work around those particular challenges as well? And then we'll also start to look at a bit of a roadmap for success. So what does this look like as a bit of a plan to shift change over the long term also? We'll jump into that first topic, which is the brain and change. And if you jump onto YouTube, jump onto the internet, you'll find a whole heap of different topics, views, opinions, science as well, which is critical around how the brain processes change. One of the common things that you'll hear, and it's probably a myth to break down, is you'll hear a lot of people, and I think this is relevant for those on the call, a lot of people say that people don't like change, humans don't like change, employees don't, organizations don't like change. I'll actually challenge that and say that we actually do like change. People, groups, humans like change. What we don't necessarily like is the process through which we have to go through to achieve that change. Part of what makes us the people that we are and humans as what they are is our ability to change and evolve and move from one sort of step to another step and one destination to another destination, whatever fashion that may look like. Part of that process, though, usually involves what can be a painstaking, difficult, lengthy, energy-consuming, resource-consuming process to achieve that change. That's the part that humans or people find more difficult. The reason is that part of the way our brains operate and go about doing day-to-day life, and you'll be able to reflect on examples in your own life or where you've seen other people do this, is that we like to conserve energy. We as humans like to conserve energy. That is, we know that very much around how the brain operates. And so part of the brain's process around, well, if I am going to change and I'm going to go through a process of change, the energy, resource, time, whatever that's going to look like that I'm going to have to invest in facilitating that change, is that going to be worth the outcome that either I'm going to get or I may potentially get, which changes the equation again. So we want to conserve energy as much as we possibly can. And I probably one of the simplest and best examples of that, and that in Australia, or particularly down in Victoria, I know we don't call it the Melbourne Cricket Ground because that's a lot of energy to say Melbourne Cricket Ground. We call it the MCG. And in fact, MCG, 3 syllables there, that's actually still consuming a lot of energy. So let's just call it the G. We're saving as much energy as we possibly can. So even in those small things, you can imagine what that looks like on a grander scale. So part of facilitating this change process in your organizations is about being or helping people to see what the end outcome might be or could start to look like, or what that process could look like, so that people can start to see, okay, well, the energy I'm going to have to invest in this change, even it may not be extra work or doing something additional, it may just be I have to now do something different. That's still energy. The cognitive processes that sit behind that, that's still energy that has to be consumed. Being able to articulate to people and to the organization that energy, that investment, resources, whatever it's going to look like, is worth the end outcome that we're working towards. The way we go about change, and I'll introduce you here to the stages of change model. And you would have seen this model perhaps in different textbooks, very, very well-known model across the psychology space. This model in particular was developed in the health psychology space of understanding what's the process through which people go through to undertake a change in some form of health behavior. Since then, a lot of research around it in terms of being able to articulate that actually these are the stages that individuals and groups go through when they're going to make a change in a behavior or in an attitude or to achieve a particular outcome. What I'll preempt this model actually by for those of you in leader positions, and I'd say part of the reason you're dialing into this webinar is you're looking to influence change, and so by that nature you're in a leadership role. Incredible model to understand from a leadership point of view, because being able to understand and articulate where you are and where others are on this model helps to tailor what are the things that I might need to do differently or provide in order to help people move through these stages of change. So the first stage, as the name suggests, is what we call pre-contemplation. If an individual is at pre-contemplation, it has not even crossed their mind that they may need to change, it hasn't even crossed their mind that they may need to do something differently or go about how they behave, how they think differently to what they currently do. At the contemplation stage, this is where I start to, or an individual may start to go, okay, well, yeah, I've always done it this way. Maybe there's a different way I could go about doing it. Or yeah, actually, maybe there's something else I could consider here. Or actually, yeah, that's probably being unhelpful. I probably need to think about this a little bit differently. They start to weigh it up. At the preparation stage, if an individual is at this stage of attitudinal change, or I might be at this stage of attitudinal change, this is where I start to go, okay, well, I've weighed it up and I can see that this different new, approach may work. What are the things that I may need to do differently? What are the things I may need to put in place, stop doing, tweak in how I do them in order to adopt that approach or that way of thinking? So I start to get ready to make that change. The action phase, as the name suggests, is where I then commit to that change. I put that change in place and I make that change. The maintenance phase is where that change is then sustained over the long term as well. Interestingly, one of the most difficult parts of this process in any attitudinal change, if you change your thinking around a particular product brand, or you change your thinking, or this is an organizational wide change, the same stages apply. The most difficult is the maintenance phase, around how that is sustained over the long term. Part of what sets that maintenance phase up for success is how the other stages are first developed or invested in as part of that as well. Where this comes unstuck quite often is see a lot of leaders, a lot of stakeholders, a lot of people that are responsible for driving change, and we see it a lot from safety culture change point of view, is they come in at the action phase. Is great, I've gone through at an individual level the things that we need to do differently, and yep, here's the things that we need to put in place, here's the things that we need to stop doing. And then we go to the organization or to a team and say, hey, here's what the new looks like. We're going to stop doing this. We're not going to do this. Or we're going to tweak this, just because of this reason, but here's what the change looks like. That change, you can almost guarantee, is set up to fail, because we haven't actually taken people through those stages of change at an individual and then a group level to be able to jump into the action phase as part of that. What you can often find it from a leadership point of view as well, and again, I refer to my earlier point around this being an incredible model from a leadership point of view, is that we may see or we may roll out a change with your team as an example, and you'll be met with some resistance, some pushback as to what that might look like. It might be, hey, I know I've been doing this process for 10 years now, but actually we're going to change that and we're going to do this. And in your head, it makes perfect sense, but all of a sudden you're being met with resistance and pushback on it. The reason why is that we haven't actually taken people through those stages of change in order for them to buy in and support the change. The equivalent, I'll use the example here, is that my physio, as an example, could say, look, Ben, I need you to do this gym program. I've come back from surgery or whatever it might be. Ben, I need you to do this gym program 4 times a week. And I go, yep, no worries, pay the fee. Yep, all good, sounds good. But in my mind, I'm thinking, gym 4 times a week, how am I possibly going to fit that in? How, I've got to pay for a gym membership, that's, 20 odd bucks a week, and I've got this, that, and the other. I don't have any, I need to go and get some new runner, all these sorts of things popping into my mind as to why that's going to be difficult. He can tell me as much as he wants that I need to go to the gym 4 times a week, do X, Y, Z, etc. Until I personally have moved through the contemplation into preparation, not until I've moved through those stages am I actually going to commit to that change process and actually go to the gym 4 times a week. Then, as you can imagine, I'm sure, and I say this contemplating the gym tonight for myself, is then, well, how do we sustain that over the long term as well? And back to my earlier point, how that's sustained is set up through how we go through those change processes early on in the process as well. What I will invite, and we'll unpack this just in a moment. Some of you are familiar with the start with why and those sorts of frameworks out there. It maps very clearly onto these stages of change, that if we're going to influence people to move through these stages of change, to influence someone to move from the pre-contemplation stage into the contemplation stage, often what we need to clearly articulate is the why behind a decision or the why behind a change. To then move people from the contemplation stage into the preparation stage is we then need to articulate the how. Okay, well, this is why we're going to do the change, and this is how we're going to go about doing the change. And then to get people ready to jump into action, it's then clearly articulating the what. Okay, well, what is it that this needs to look like as an outcome from this process as well? They overlap a little bit between the models, but you can see how being able to articulate the why, the how, and the what also maps quite clearly onto moving people through those stages of change as well. Which is what I want to spend a little bit of time unpacking as part of this webinar, is around, well, how do you go about influencing change, whether that be in an individual, whether that be across a team, whether that be across an organization of 100 people, whether that be an organization across 100,000 people. It's a very similar process through what is going to set that change up for success. What I'll draw your attention to first is what we call the complex change model, and you would have seen this model around before. Very well known model for those that work in change management and the like there as well, of this complex change. What it articulates is the key things or key elements, as part of this Gnosis model here, the key elements that we need to consider in order to set a change process up for success. One of the key things about these different stages is that they set an individual, a group, or an organization up for success with respect, I'll come back to this slide, through how they move through the stages of change. Let me bring this up on the screen just here. The first thing that we need as part of this complex change model is we need to provide people with a vision or a picture as to where we're headed. What's the goal? Where are we now? And where do we want to get to as part of that change process? The next stage is making sure that we've got consensus as part of that. There's alignment around what that change process needs to look like. The next thing people need is they need to feel that they have the skills in order to enact that change. People need incentives. They need some sort of driver to embark or to invest in that change. Then they need the resources to be able to deliver on that change. And then they need a clearly articulated action plan around what that change is going to look like. When we have those 6 key elements, what we're then doing is setting up the change process for success. As I mentioned, these map very well onto what it looks like to move people through the stages of change at an individual level, likewise at a group level as well. To move people from the pre-contemplation and get them through the contemplation stage, getting ready for preparation, there's 2 key things that we need. The first one is we need to clearly articulate the vision. And the second thing we need to do is make sure we've got consensus alignment, particularly amongst your key stakeholders. With those key elements is we can move a group or individuals through to that contemplation stage. Once we've got to the contemplation stage, the things that we need to consider and we need to look at making sure are available or are clearly articulated for people as part of that change process is that we need to make sure that people have got the skills, that we've got the incentives, so we've got the motivation there to embark on that change, that people have the resources to support that change. And with those 3 things, we can actually move people through to be ready for that action phase, to be ready to jump into that action. For people to jump into that action fully though, and to actually commit to that change, we need a clearly articulated action plan. With each of those elements, we're then able to set that change process up for success. I'll invite, just as I just talked through the next little bit, is you'll be able to recall different change processes that you may have been involved in or you may have witnessed, and they may be within your organization, within a past organization, or you may have observed in other organizations. And what you'll be able to see is that those change processes that may not have gone nearly as well as what they could have, I would be confident in saying they'd be missing one, if not more, of these elements. And as a result, where we've missed or that change process has missed one of these elements, it's meant that that change has not been set up for success at all and was almost sort of destined to fail as part of that. We know some of the research out of McKinsey knows that 70% of organizational transformations fail. The reason why is that they wouldn't have considered all of these 6 key elements in setting that change process up for the best. So we're going to go through each of these stages, and how we're going to go through as part of this webinar is I don't think so far this is necessarily rocket science or anyone's had sort of any brainwaves around going, oh, of course. We all know that each of these elements are critical, but sometimes it can be hard to gauge around how well are we providing or delivering each of these elements as part of a change process to set that shift up for success. Seeing how people respond to a change can actually help us identify what we need to provide more of, or where we might need to just dial it up, or just actually we need to just move the resourcing from here over to here, or we need to better articulate the incentives around this. Understanding some of the feelings, the frames, the emotions that are coming back from people can help us identify that as well. Again, I will highlight this applies at an individual level and likewise a group level as well. So the first part is around influencing stakeholder buy-in. And if you're going to embark on a change process, on a cultural change process, on a safety cultural change process, it is absolutely critical that there is alignment, that there is buy-in, that there is skin in the game and sponsorship from the executive team. That is absolutely critical in any safety culture change process. What we can sometimes see within different organisations or from different people that are quite passionate around driving change is they can be very quick to jump to the action phase. And I'll bring up the stages of change here again here, is that people can go, great, look, safety culture's here, this is where the current state is, I want to get the safety culture to here, and they may have been to the organisation for 3 months, they may have been with the organisation for for 10 years, but they're going, gee, I can see a better picture of what the safety culture can be here at organisation X. We're going to go and do this, and then we're going to go and do that, and then we're going to go and do that. And with those things, that's going to help us create the best safety culture. All well and good, but if we haven't got the stakeholders, and particularly the key stakeholders as part of this process, aligned and on board with what that pitch is going to look like, you can almost bet your dollar that that change process is going to hit nowhere near the impact of what would be working towards. So how do we go about getting stakeholders on board? And it's a question that pops up quite often. It's a question that will prompt quite often in different conversations. Someone might come to us and go, hey, look, I've seen your program here, very well received, want to roll it out at this organisation. All well and good, but that's a change process. This isn't just a program around, patting each other on the back and feeling good. This is a change process. So how do we make sure that your key stakeholders are on board to drive that change process as well? The first thing we need is a clear vision. We need a clear picture around what good or what the outcome is going to look like. Where we can sometimes see people come undone with this is that the vision around what the desired outcome is that we're working towards can be positioned almost as a marketing piece, or as a sort of the poster on the wall, or just the sort of the fancy catchphrase around where we want to be. Yes, that may be an element of it, a very, very small element. The key element is around what's the picture that we're trying to create here that people can buy into, they can jump onto, they can see, but it's the reason it's called a vision, that they can see, I can see what that better outcome, I can see what that good, what that different, what that the improvement might look like. Not just we want to be organisation X, that's all well and good. What does it look like for people to be able to see that, with their own eyes? Orsted, I'll refer to them again, is they did an incredible job in terms of how they communicated the change, not just to their organisation, but to the public, in terms of, we want to be this organisation that's driving the market around being focused on renewables. We want to be at the forefront of that. By 2025, we want to be completely renewable. We want to shift almost sort of the paradigm through which we operate and be this organisation that is driving a change across the industry as a whole, not just within this organisation. Part of the incredible sentiment around, that we all know around Martin Luther King's speech, part of why that speech is so renowned is because there was a very clearly articulated vision that he was describing as part of that. What I'd invite as part of this process is, what's the picture that you're trying to describe to people? Not just, we want to be, safety culture that's at this level of maturity, and we want to get to this level of maturity. Okay, that's all well and good from perhaps a measurement point of view, but what does that look like? What does that level of maturity look like for your organisation? What I would invite you to do is, if you're the person driving this change, is spend a lot of time, and this is the sort of stuff that you devote a bit of time to thinking about. Likewise, when you're going for a walk, doing the gardening, think about, how do I describe what that's going to look like for our organisation? What would I see? What would I hear? What would I feel as part of that? How do I create a picture that people can then see themselves in their own mind, that they can go, I get what that's going to look like now, beyond just the fancy words, beyond just the marketing that sits around that as well. Without a clear vision, without a clear picture, is the change process can certainly stall because there's not really a direction or a destination through which you're heading in. And we've seen that a number of times before, where we might develop a strategy as an example with an organization around what their change process needs to look like. But either they'll skip the step or they won't spend the time clearly articulating what's the vision, what's the goal, what's the picture of what we're working towards. Without that step, yeah, we've got these different sort of projects, initiatives in place. What are we actually trying to work to as the ideal outcome as part of that as well? One of the other things about having a clearly articulated vision that I actually firmly believe is often not highlighted enough. Having a clear vision helps the key stakeholders, likewise the organisation, to better overcome obstacles as they pop up along the way. So as those different obstacles, as those different challenges pop up along the way throughout that journey, people being able to see within their own heads what that goal, what that end outcome looks like, better equips people to go, we've got a stuck, we've got a challenge here, I've still got to get to that destination, how do I go around it to get to that destination, rather than we've got a stuck, let's just stop here, we've done pretty well. Orsted, again, great example of that, is that they had the financial struggles, profits were dropping by quite a considerable percent, 40% sort of over that period there. They could have gone, we tried, we got here, it's not quite going to work for us as an organization, let's either go back or just tighten up what we are doing. They still had their vision. They knew where they wanted to get. So it was about going, let's regroup, re-articulate the plan. How do we get around this challenge to be able to achieve what we want to achieve? I use the example to demonstrate this. Let's say I said to everyone on the call here, I'll use my local sort of street near myself, Racecourse Road as an example. Whole lot of coffee shops along Racecourse Road as part of that. If I said to everyone on this call, hey, let's meet for coffee on Racecourse Road. Yeah, it's a bit of a goal, it's a bit of sort of an idea and of where we want to get to. But if I said, let's meet for coffee tomorrow, great, I've sort of articulated that, but not very clearly to people. What I would then see is that people on this call, some people going too far away, a lot of energy, or I'm not really sure what for or why we're meeting for coffee, I'm not going to go. But for those that did rock up, and I do appreciate that, for those that do rock up, what we would likely see is, there might be, half a dozen, 10 coffee shops along Racecourse Road, arrive at Racecourse Road and go, well, there's a coffee shop, let's just go to that coffee shop. But then someone else comes from the other end of Racecourse Road and goes, well, there's a coffee shop, let's just go to that one there. Or that one looks good, and all of a sudden, this group that's on the call would end up in different destinations. Had I articulated that differently though and said, we're going to meet at this coffee shop on this particular corner at this particular time, can I invite everyone to be there? Now, of those that go, yep, yeah, great, I'll head there, we would better see people arriving at the correct and aligned destination of what I, as the change driver, I'm trying to achieve as part of that. Here's the kicker though, I think that makes sort of fairly straightforward sense. The kicker with that though, is that let's say someone here arrived at Racecourse Road and they're walking up Racecourse Road and, the races might be on, or there's road works going on or whatever it might be, and the road's completely blocked off. Is that had we gone in the first instance, someone would arrive there and they'd be going, oh, we'll head up to that coffee shop up there. All of a sudden, roadworks. Oh, well, let's just go to this coffee shop here. Or actually, let's just go to that one back down that end of the street. In the second scenario, though, where I clearly articulated this is where we want to be and by when, you get to that stuck, that challenge, that roadblock in the road, and people go, let's find a way to get around these roadworks. All this busy where I can't get through for whatever, the road's blocked off. We'll invest the time and energy to go around and then go and meet at that coffee shop as Ben suggested. You can see how providing and clearly articulating that picture of what the ideal outcome looks like helps people overcome challenges along the way. The next thing that you need consensus. And what I would invite you to do as part of this is really making sure that you understand your key stakeholders that are going to be responsible and accountable for driving this change process across the organization. One of the things that I see some people get wrong sometimes with seeking consensus is they'll go in and try and get everyone in the room together and go, we'll get everyone in the room together, we're going to talk through the change, we're going to talk through the coffee shop that we want to be at and by what time, and just go, this is what we're going to do. Any objections to that? Groupthink can quickly kick in that particular scenario. While not inviting getting consensus, depending on the level of change and how much of a change that will be, is invest the time to get to know each of the key stakeholders and spend time with them either one-on-one or within small groups to understand what sorts of things they need to know, or what might be their concerns or objections around this particular change process as well. You can address them then in a one-on-one basis and start to actually build your army, for want of a better term, that's going to help drive this change process. You then step into, let's say, and I know there's some people on the call that are in this scenario at the moment, is let's say, okay, we're going to drive safety culture change because, there's not a fire underneath the chair, but there's all the ingredients for it. Is that, okay, well, there might be 10, senior leaders, execs I need to get on board with this. I can go in and present to all of those execs, all of those stakeholders all at once. Very quickly, I might get met with resistance, depending, again, on the level of change and the contextual factors around that. Better way to do it, and sometimes this can be go slow to go fast, is to actually spend the time, invest the time with each of those stakeholders one-on-one. Hey, here's where my thinking's at. Here's why my thinking's there. What, where are your thoughts at? What do you need to be able to support and drive this change within your team or your part of the organization as well? The other thing I'll note on seeking consensus and getting that consensus is start to plant the seed early. Is that, and again, I know there's some people on this call that are starting to look at this, is that if you're looking at, sort of in 6 months, in 12 months time, we want to be ready to do X, Y, Z, you start to just plant the seed now of, hey, yeah, in sort of, in 6 months time, we may need to look at collecting some data around X, Y, Z. Or, hey, we may need to look at, if the organization is going to be doing this, we probably need to look at, better equipping our leaders to go and support that. Start to just drop it so that when you start to engage in those conversations, and perhaps one-on-one, is people aren't caught off guard even with those first conversations, is that they've started to just socialize in their subconscious around, okay, here's some of the things of what might be popping up in the future as well. That's often an understated part of it. So for those on the call that are going, oh, look, probably want to start to socialize this in 6 months, start now, just with small pieces going, hey, I reckon we might need to maybe look at that in the future, or maybe we just need to better understand how we're going here, or hey, have we considered this? Maybe we might need to in the future. You're not concreting plans, you're just starting to socialize. As I mentioned before, understand your stakeholders. What's important to them? When any stakeholder and they're presented with a change process of any sort, is they want to know, well, what's the impact to them and what's the impact to their part of the business? So first of all, understand that and spend the time with them to go, hey, if we were to look at X, Y, Z, what sort of impact would that have on yourselves? And that's where I can list off quite a few examples of stakeholders in some of the organizations that we work with. They've done very, very well of including operational parts of the business in what they're trying to drive, or they've included the OD teams as part of driving this safety culture initiative, because it's going to have an impact on the sort of change that they are trying to drive as well. So understand what's important to them. The other part is use the data to help form the story. And what I'll note on the data here is look at the data that's going to be most relevant or most important for each of your key stakeholders. So as an example, what sort of data that a CEO might look at is going to be slightly different from the sort of data that's going to be highlighted or of particular interest to what a CFO might be interested in, which is often going to be different again to what the board might be interested in as well. There's the data that'll be most relevant for you, but what's the data that's going to be most relevant to each of those key stakeholder groups? Sometimes asking them as well, hey, this is sort of where I see things at, what are some of the key metrics that you're looking at or your team's looking at in relation to the safety culture or to XYZ as part of that as well. The key part around this though is being able to tell a story around that data as well. Where we'll often see change come undone is where people go in to roll out a change and go, here's the key data points, we need to do X, Y, Z. that's part of it. Where that can come undone though is that change is an emotional process. Is that we know there's plenty of research out there, there's plenty of scientific evidence that tells us that we as humans have a number of different biases, and they play a part in how we make decisions, change being one of those as well. So data can help get us to a point, and to varying degrees with different individuals, but being able to appeal to the emotional brain is also critical in driving that change as well. What are the data points? What's the story I tell around that data? What's the story I tell around the change that we're trying to achieve here? Again, what does that look like from a vision point of view as well? Spending the time clearly articulating the story to yourself so that then you can articulate it to others is really critical to setting this up for success. I've spoken to a few people and of recent as well, where I'll ask, what is it that you're trying to work towards? What's the change you're trying to seek here? What's the desired impact that you're trying to get? A response to the effect of, oh, we just want to be better, or we need to shift this metric here. That level of sort of communication around the need for change is not going to get the stakeholders on board. What's the story you're going to tell around the data and the change process as part of that also? I'll add a note to that as well. Spend time with those that are close to you in that change process, and articulating, bouncing back that story with those that are very close as part of the change process before you start articulating that to other parts of the organization as well. So, if you're if you're sitting in a role such of head of safety as an example, what's the data telling us? What's the story I can tell around that data and the data that other people are looking at as well? Articulate that to your team. Get them to sort of constructively challenge that particular story, so that when you put it to others, you're clear, you're articulate, you're confident in the story that you're trying to position with others as well. If you can get that story right, you'll set the whole change process up very well for success, as we saw with Orsted. Want to move into, well, all well and good, you've got people on board, you've got a clear story, a clear vision of where you want to head. You're still going to get met with objections, you're still going to get met with roadblocks along the way. And some of these quotes here, I'm sure will resonate with different people on the call here. If you get the vision, you get people on board and you think, great, we are up and running here, but then you'll still get met with these objections from perhaps the workforce, and I'm sure frustratingly from people that you felt or you thought were on board as well. You'll see some of these different quotes up on the screen here that I was referring to. I know we need to change, but what if I'm not the right person to do this particular job here, or I don't have time for doing this, or didn't we do this 5 years ago, or why don't we just do this, or rather than this big sort of change diagnostic process, let's just roll out the shiny part, let's roll out the programs, or we'll just go and give people these this particular training and go, oh, that's the change done. Hang on, what are the sorts of things that we need to consider? And again, the go slow to go fast to set this up for success as well. So here's the other key elements that you need to consider in order to drive the change process. Without making sure that people have the appropriate skills to drive the change, what you can often find is that people start second guessing or feeling anxious around their role in what they need to do to drive the change. And I'm sure we've all felt the experience where perhaps we've been put on the spot in a meeting to talk to a project or a particular piece of work, or we've been asked, hey, can you speak at this particular conference or this session or this meeting in half an hour? And that anxiety creeps up, largely because in that moment we don't feel that we've got the skills, knowledge, whatever that might look like, to be able to go and deliver that. The same can happen with change, is that if we're asking people to, leaders, an example, hey leaders, we want you to go and have these sorts of safety interactions differently, or actually introduce them because we haven't done them previously. We want to see you having safety interactions and so many as part of a month, because this is going to help us support the sort of input that we're getting so that we can make better decisions around the sort of safety culture that we're trying to drive. And you might be met with resistance, and if you see people going, oh, I don't know if I'm going to be able to do that, that anxiety or that second guessing is telling you that those people don't feel they have the skills to be able to enact that particular initiative, change, whatever we want to describe it as. So making sure people have got the skills. The next thing is that people need to feel that they are making progress, that the input that they're putting into that change is being valued as well. The incentives are very, very key to that. If you see people starting to drop off the wagon, or they were driving the change, but now they're sort of taking a bit of a back seat, the question I invite you to consider is, how well have these people been recognised, incentivised to keep going with the change as well? This is an ongoing process. The key things I'd invite you to consider as part of this is to make sure that those incentives clearly attach to the vision that you're trying to achieve, not just, oh, you've done great work here, you know, here's X reward, or, you know, a pat on the back. Is, hey, you've really helped us in achieving this vision by doing X, Y, Z. Attach it to the vision so people can see how their efforts are directly contributing to the vision. The other thing I'd invite you to consider as part of this is that make sure the incentives are relevant for the people that you're working with as well. You know, an organisation working with a little while ago, their sort of reward as part of the change process that they were trying to seek, it fell over a little bit because they went to the group and said, hey, we're going to go to this restaurant in town, you know, for a lunch, and it didn't really have the impact they were wanting. All the people wanted in that particular group was just a barbecue at the end of the Friday. So looking at what's going to be most relevant to the people we're working with here as well. The other thing I'll note about incentives is it's a continual journey that you need to look at as part of this as well. I haven't seen organisations overdo this. They can overdo particular elements of it, of going, oh, we'll give people, you know, the Bunnings voucher or whatever it might be, any voucher, sort of a continual basis. That probably needs to change how we go about doing that. But I've never yet met someone that's left an organisation or stepped away from a change process for feeling overvalued as part of either that change or as part of that organisation. You can pick up on what I'm getting at as part of that as well. So if people don't get the right incentives, if they don't feel valued, you see people start to step off or fall off the wagon and go, yeah, I'll support the change, but I'm going to take a bit of a back seat. As you start to see more people do that, you start to see the change really start to slow down as well. The next one is we need to make sure that people have the resources. Often with a change initiative, particularly if you're going to invest in safety leadership as an example, what you're asking leaders to do is to put something extra on their plate. If we're going to do that, we've also got to then look at, well, what are the things that we perhaps might be able to take off their plate to be able to support them to go and do that, so they've got the time, energy, resources to be going doing X, Y, Z. If we're going to be asking, you know, people to be having particular conversations around particular critical risk as part of activities, what are the resources we can provide to support those particular conversations, those particular activities as well? Without those resources, people will feel frustrated. And unfortunately, I can't think of a better example of what we saw earlier in the year with RAT tests, is people were happy to jump on board and go, yep, I see the value of testing and whatnot in terms of what we're trying to achieve as a community, but couldn't get the RAT tests anywhere. And so people became quite frustrated with that. How do we make sure that people have got the right resources to be able to jump on board with the change? The last one we need to make sure that there's a clear action plan, that people know if we're here and we're trying to achieve this picture, this vision, what are the key steps that we need to do in order to achieve that change? What I would invite as part of this as well is often forming an action plan is as much articulating what we are going to do to drive that change, as much as what we're not going to do in order to drive that change as well. We can be very quick to, you know, look at some diagnostic results and go, oh, we're going to do this, or we're going to do this, or we're going to do this, or we're going to do this. You know, I've seen a lot of organizations do that. Is pull back a bit. What are the key levers that are going to have the most impact on the vision that we're trying to achieve here, rather than go look at all these different things that we can do as part of that process as well. If we don't have a clear action plan, is what you'll get is a false start effect, is people will jump on board with the change and then, oh, actually, no, we're just going to tweak that. We're going to roll out this process different from that slight tweak of that process we rolled out 2 months ago. People go, well, it's shifting. It feels like we're on a sort of a treadmill, just sort of burning away without actually making much progress as well. As part of that plan, make sure there's a combination of some of your bigger projects to enact that change, but likewise your quick wins, so that people can start to feel and start to see that success along the way. be deliberate as well as building some of those quick wins in so that people can start to see the momentum that's being created from the change also. So how well have we prepared our people for this change? And this is where I'll draw your attention to the handout for today is around that roadmap for success. And the key stages as part of that roadmap is the first stage is collecting the data. Is what is the data telling us? And this is a key part or a key conversation that we have with a lot of organizations. And what I've noticed is organizations can sit in two sorts of buckets. Is there's those that want to really drive meaningful, good, impactful change. And then there's those that want to, not that it may be articulated in this way, that just want to be seen to be doing some good. They are two, or can be two quite distinct areas. And I invite you to consider that in perhaps some of the changes that you're rolling out. Is this about just being seen to be doing something in the safety culture space? Or is this about driving meaningful change that's going to be sustained over the long term? So the first part of facilitating that change process is understanding where we are now. What's the data telling us? That will then help us inform, rather than throwing a blanket over everything, what are the key levers that we need to push and pull? What are the things we need to dial up? What are the things we need to dial down? What are the things that we just don't need to do? They'd be great to do, but we don't need to do, either because we can't or because they're actually not going to be the key things that are going to drive the vision that we are trying to achieve as part of that. The next part is form a steering committee. So who are the key stakeholders that are going to help drive this change? Some of the organizations that I look at and often use examples of those that have delivered the change very, very well, often the first or the key stakeholder or the person responsible or that initiates this change is they're very, very effective of getting stakeholders around them on board with the change, in getting them to buy in and then be, you'll be familiar with the law of diffusion of looking at, well, who are those innovators or those early adopters that I can get on board and be the ones to actually drive this change, so that I don't have to be the person that's out the front driving this change. My role is just to make sure that, okay, I need this person on board here, or I need this part of the organization driving X, Y, Z, or I need this person, to be responsible for this part here. And they're almost the person that's conducting the orchestra in a way, rather than the person that's trying to play every instrument to drive the change. If you're finding you're that person and you feel like you're playing every instrument, take a step back, look at the bigger picture and go, okay, well, who are the people and how do I get these people on board to be the ones that are driving the change alongside me, rather than doing different tasks that I've allocated. There's a key difference as part of that as well. The next part is create a clear strategy. Is if we want to be here and this is the vision that we're working towards, what are the key priorities? What are the key rocks that we need to target in order to be able to get us there? And again, I reiterate that term. This is also looking at what do we need to do and what don't we need to do? What can we do? What can't we do as part of this change process as well? As part of identifying those key priorities and looking at, well, how are we going to measure them? How, what's the scoreboard that we're going to be looking at? It's then looking at, well, how are we going to implement that plan? What's the plan going to look like? If we've got 4 priorities over the next 12 months, what's the plan to target each of those 4 areas? Where that's clearly articulated, and again, I look at the organizations we've worked with that have had the most success in driving cultural change, is they've been able to clearly articulate, these are the things that we're going to do to target these 4 areas, because those 4 areas are going to have the biggest impact on us achieving this vision. Where that's articulated, people can see where they can support the plan, rather than, gee, we want to create this level of maturity of safety culture, and there's not a clear plan around what are the key things that we're going to do to go about achieving that. The last part is keeping your finger on the pulse. Is, well, how do we track success? How do we make sure, how do we know whether we're ahead, whether we're behind? Again, I come back to that point of, if you want to be seen to just be doing something, then yes, okay, perhaps, these sorts of metrics, they are important, but they can be forgotten. If you want to drive sustained change though, what's the data I'm going to be using or collecting, both quantitative and qualitative, that's going to help me see how we're tracking as part of this change process? So making sure that we are looking at what it looks like to keep our finger on the pulse. An example of an organisation that we worked with over the last few years around how they went about driving change, and very successful change. One of the key things that they did is looked at what's the data, what's the evidence that's going to help us work out what we're going to do as part of this change process. They then created a clear steering committee. There was clear stakeholders on board, and it was quite incredible to see how those stakeholders cascaded out across different sites as well. There's clear alignment, a clear drive amongst the senior leaders, and this was held to account as leaders go down. So not just, well, this is what we expect, and then leaders were able to get away with not buying on into the change further down the chain, is people were held to that level of safety leadership. They rolled out some safety training programs for leaders. They invested in coaching. That's a critical part. If you're going to develop leaders, much like setting up any successful change, there needs to be some coaching that supports that. And then also looking at, well, how do we sustain this over the long term? How do we embed this in our fabric? How do we mobilize this in our rhythms, the way we go about doing tasks on a day-to-day basis if we're going to drive this change? The impact for them was quite incredible. So a 45% reduction in LTIs over 2 years. Their reporting went through the roof, particularly when they're looking at high potential. So that was a very, very encouraging result to see. And their safety culture maturity stepped a whole step, which is a significant change for an organisation of this size as well. The last part, though, is around, and I'm mindful of time, is around, well, how do we maintain this? How do we keep this sustained over time as well? People can often perhaps get frustrated with change because we can go in with this perception that change is going to be perfect and that is going to be final. Change is an ongoing process. Change is not a project. Change is not a marketing campaign. Change is an ongoing journey that we as an organisation, you as an organisation, are going to be looking at. So it's continually jumping back to go, okay, have I still got consensus? Have I still got alignment amongst my stakeholders? What about new stakeholders coming in? Can often see projects fall over where you get a change in stakeholder, and now all of a sudden you've got someone that comes in to go, actually this is going to be working against what I want to do as the new stakeholder or new leader here. How do you get them on board to be able to drive and support that change over the long term as well? So constantly revisiting, do people still have the skills of what we're asking them to do now? Have people still got the resources, or has something else taken the place here as part of that as well? And are we still valuing people and highlighting people that have jumped on board the change early? For those that are going to be later in the journey of jumping on board the change, they need to see people demonstrating the change early on, and being able to value and articulate and highlight those people, those examples early on, demonstrates perhaps to the later majority that the change is achievable as well. I'll throw open to a few questions if I can see them coming through at all.
Yeah, thank you, Ben. We've had a few questions come in. Some of them are a bit similar, so I might just try and group them together given our time restraint. But how do you think is a good idea to convince old school public servants to move from a compliance-based system full of clutter to something more contemporary and efficient and focused on safety and work? How is it possible to advance cultural change in a fatigued environment?
Yeah. It's in that example, there's a few different things. One key thing would be very clearly understand their objections to change, of those that are old school. Why are they stuck perhaps in that old school thinking? What is it about that that's important to them? And how can you weave that into a way that it's perceived as not as much of a bigger change? Alongside that, also look at, well, who are the people that are on board, that are going to help drive this change, and that are very keen, committed, excited about what this new can look like, and perhaps focus the energy there. The extension of that is that look at a pilot, or look at part of the organisation where you can enact this change to demonstrate to those that are perhaps, perhaps the late majority, or perhaps are a bit resistant to that change, that they can see, okay, what Ben was talking about here, I can see what they've been able to achieve with that team. And then you can use that as almost an example or a case study of sorts to demonstrate to other parts of the organisation that may be led by these people around what can be achieved as part of that as well. There's a whole heap of contextual things to understand around that as well. Also looking at what other key stakeholders, either on that similar level or a higher level, can also create the picture around what's expected as part of where we want to head as part of that as well.
Great. Another one here is, by research, how long does it usually take an organisation to reach the highest level of safety culture? What are the tips?
If I had a dollar for every time I've been asked that question, look, what we often describe for, we work with organisations of different sizes. An organisation of between your sort of 500 to 1,000 people, we often say that with the right devotion of energy, resources, right commitment to that change process, can often move up a level of maturity, a level each year on average. I'll premise that, I'll put an asterisk next to that by saying it varies a lot from organisations. It depends what sort of action is done early on. You can move through that much quicker. I've also seen organisations move through it slower as well, and often have that conversation in a strategy workshop that question will pop up. But, well, it's a little bit up to yourselves and as the key stakeholder group. If you're aligned, if you're committed to this change, you can move through it quite quickly. And moving from what we would call an extrinsically driven culture to an intrinsically driven one, so you move to a private compliance one, moving from a counterproductive or a public compliance, for those that know our maturity model, to a private is the key step. Once you get there, you've then got the right attitudes to then fuel the broader change that you might be trying to drive as well. It varies a lot though. It varies a lot, and getting some of these key elements right are what will be the thing that sets this change process up for success. Often where it stalls or halts for a while, something's missing in what I've described today.
Okay, great. We might end there for the questions.
Wonderful. What I will draw your attention to is our Safety Leadership Masterclass that will be coming up in September, which is not far. It's coming up. It'll be around the corner before we know it. As part of this, it is around developing people's expertise in this field and driving that change and equipping leaders to be the best safety leaders that they can be. That's going to include a whole heap of resources to support that journey. It is about creating a group of people that you go through this journey with from different organisations. You can learn off other people. There's a whole heap of resources that will be provided as part of that process as well, and a great journey to embark on. So if you are interested, certainly respond to the poll that Cassie has just put up. Likewise, I'll also draw your attention to safety culture diagnostics. These are critical to understanding how best to set up a change process and what the areas are that you need to target in order to deliver the best outcome or best impact that you're looking for. This is the distinction between those organisations that go, hey, look, we want to get this right and we want to understand, do an analysis first, understand the current state of play before we go about rolling out different things, versus those organisations that just want to be seen to be doing something good. If that's the case, that's okay. But for that long-term sustained change, we've got to understand what the scoreboard currently is, what the current state of play is as well. So if you are interested in those, yeah, certainly express your interest in those, and feel free to reach out. Also, my details are on the screen. You can see I'm very passionate about this topic, and I could talk into the into the late hours of tonight around safety culture change and what sets cultural change up for success. There's a heap of different things, and I would happy to jump on a call, grab a coffee with anyone that's interested in exploring or understand, okay, what might be some of those things that they might need to do more of, or that they may not have yet considered to set this change up for success as well. So thank you very much, everyone, for dialing in. We appreciate your time, and we wish you the best for a safe and productive rest of the day.
Thanks again, Ben. On behalf of Centus, I'd like to thank everyone for joining us today. We look forward to having you join us for one of our next webinars, and until then, stay safe.